The summons arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a royal courier whose polished boots seemed an affront to the paint-splattered floor of Elodie's small studio. The scent of linseed oil and turpentine clung to everything, a familiar comfort that was instantly disturbed by the crisp, official smell of the palace. Wax seals and old parchment. Elodie Voss, an omega whose world was circumscribed by the four walls of her workspace and the canvases that leaned against them, stared at the wolf head seal on the heavy cream envelope. Her heart, usually a steady, quiet rhythm, began to hammer against her ribs. Royal summons were for alphas with territorial disputes or betas being called to service. They were not for omega portrait artists who specialized in capturing the gentle smiles of merchants' children and the proud bearing of retired pack elders. She broke the seal with a trembling thumb, her own wolf, a quiet and placid creature, stirring with a rare flicker of anxiety. The script was stark and elegant. By decree of the Alpha King, the artist Elodie Voss is hereby commissioned to render the official coronation portrait of His Majesty, King Leander Ashworth. Elodie read the words 3 times. Her breath hitched. The Alpha King. The Masked King. No one had painted him in a decade, not since the brutal rogue attack that had nearly claimed his life and had, by all accounts, stolen his face. He had ascended to the throne of the combined northern packs wearing a silver mask that covered the left side of his face, and he had not been seen without it since. The commission was the highest honor an artist in the kingdom could receive, a life-altering opportunity. It was also terrifying. Later that day, she was escorted to a sterile antechamber in the royal citadel, a place of cold stone and imposing tapestries depicting the glorious victories of Ashworth kings past. The royal chamberlain, an aging beta named Lord Valerius with eyes that had seen too much court intrigue, laid out the terms. His voice was dry as dust. The honor is unprecedented for an artist of your station, Miss Voss. The king noted your work, the portrait of Elder Maeve. He said you captured her unflinching truth. Elodie's hands clenched in her lap. The portrait of Maeve had been her favorite, a study in the beauty of a life fully lived, every line on the elder's face a testament to her story. I am honored, my lord. Valerius leaned forward, his voice dropping. There are conditions. You will not speak of the king's affliction. You will not ask about the mask. You will not attempt to persuade him to remove it. You will paint what you are presented with. Is that understood? The words were a cold weight in her stomach. An artist's duty was to the truth. How could she paint the truth of a man whose face was half hidden? A portrait of a mask was not a portrait of a king. It was a symbol, a statement of concealment. It was a lie. Her wolf whimpered softly within her, sensing the wrongness of it. But to refuse was unthinkable. It would be the end of her career, a public shaming she could not endure. I understand, she whispered, the words tasting like compromise. Her mind was already racing, turning the problem over and over. She didn't paint surfaces, she painted souls. She looked for the flicker of vulnerability in a proud alpha's eyes, the ghost of a smile on a stern beta's lips, the quiet strength in an omega's posture. She sought the story etched by life. King Leander's story was hidden, but she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the most important part of it was concealed beneath that silver plate. How was she to paint his unflinching truth when he refused to show it? She left the citadel with the heavy contract in her satchel and a heavier feeling in her heart. Back in the comforting chaos of her studio, she stood before a blank canvas, the largest she owned. She imagined the figure of the king, the broad shoulders, the powerful stance described in whispers throughout the kingdom. And then she imagined the mask, a smooth, silver void where a life should be. A chill traced its way down her spine. This would be the greatest challenge of her life, not just of her skill, but of her integrity. As she began to mix her paints, grinding pigments into oil, the familiar ritual calmed her. She would go. She would face the masked king, and she would find a way, somehow, to see him. Not just the king, not just the mask, but the man, Leander Ashworth. Her quiet wolf settled, a silent partner in her resolve. They would face the Alpha King together. The Blackwood Citadel was a fortress of jagged gray stone and imposing towers that clawed at the perpetually overcast sky. It seemed to have been hewn from the mountain itself, a monument to the unyielding power of the Ashworth line. As Elodie's carriage rattled through the final gate, she felt the sheer weight of the place press down on her. It smelled of cold rock, ancient pine, and the latent power of 1,000 wolves. This was the heart of the Alpha King's territory, and it felt like it. A stern-faced beta met her at the entrance. His scent was sharp, like ozone and steel, all duty and suspicion. His eyes, a pale, piercing gray, swept over her, cataloging her as a potential threat. "I am Beta Aldrich, the King's second," he stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "You are the artist, Elodie Voss." It wasn't a question. "I am," she said, keeping her own voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She would not be intimidated. She was here to do a job. "The King is waiting. Follow me. And remember the Chamberlain's instructions." The warning was clear. Don't cause trouble. He led her through cavernous halls where their footsteps echoed like heartbeats. Banners of dark green and silver hung from the rafters, and guards in polished armor stood as still as statues, their eyes tracking her. There was no warmth here, no life. It was a palace, but it felt like a tomb. Aldrich stopped before a set of massive oak doors carved with the image of a great wolf howling at the moon. "His Majesty is in his private study. Do not waste his time." He pushed the doors open and gestured for her to enter before pulling them shut behind her, leaving her alone in the sudden silence. The study was vast, dominated by a fireplace large enough for a man to stand in, though the hearth was cold and dark. Bookshelves soared to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound tomes. But Elodie's attention was drawn to the figure standing by the immense window, looking out over the desolate mountain landscape. The Alpha King. He was even larger than the stories suggested, a mountain of a man with shoulders that strained the fabric of his black tunic. Power rolled off him in palpable waves, a heavy presence that filled the room and made the air thick. And then he turned. The left side of his face was a plate of exquisitely crafted silver, smooth and unexpressive. It curved from his temple, down over his cheekbone, and tucked just under his jaw. The other side of his face was starkly beautiful, with a strong jaw dusted with dark stubble, a firm mouth, and one piercing, intelligent eye the color of whiskey. But it was the mask that held the eye, a perfect, cold, silver void. As he turned, a scent hit her, so powerful it made her knees weak. It was the scent of a winter storm and ancient pine forests, of cold earth and lightning. It was wild and untamed, yet laced with a profound loneliness that tugged at something deep inside her. Her inner wolf, usually so serene, sat up and took notice, a low thrum of awareness starting in her chest. Leander's single eye narrowed as he took her in. He saw a small, slender Omega, her hands stained with paint, her brown hair tied back in a simple, messy knot. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't staring at him with pity or morbid curiosity. She was just looking at him. And her scent. God's her scent. It filled his lungs, a fragrance of meadowsweet and summer rain, a soft, clean aroma that cut through the sterile coldness of his life. His wolf, a beast he had kept chained in bitterness and duty for a decade, rose up and roared a single, undeniable word in his mind. Mate. The shock of it was a physical blow. He froze, his entire body going rigid. No. It was impossible. The moon goddess wouldn't be so cruel. To give him a mate, the other half of his soul, only for her to see this ruin? He had made his peace with being alone. He had accepted his fate. He would not, could not, subject this gentle creature to a life with a monster. He forced the hope down, crushing it with the familiar weight of his own self-loathing. "You are the artist," he said, his voice a low growl, rougher than he intended. He used the tone that made hardened alphas submit, hoping it would make her falter, make her leave. Elodie simply inclined her head. "I am, Your Majesty. Elodie Voss." She didn't flinch. She met his gaze directly, her own eyes a warm, clear brown. "Thank you for this commission." He gritted his teeth behind the mask. Her calm was unnerving. "The light in this room is poor. We will use the North Conservatory for the sittings. Be here tomorrow at dawn." It was a dismissal, blunt and cold. He turned back to the window, unable to bear the sight of her, the scent of her, the impossible promise she represented. He heard her soft footsteps as she turned and left, the click of the door closing behind her. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. His hand came up, his fingers tracing the cold, unyielding edge of his silver mask. His wolf paced restlessly, whining with a longing he hadn't felt in 10 years. "Mate," it whispered again, a word of both ecstasy and agony. He was the Alpha King, he was a monster, and his mate had just walked into his life, bringing with her a light he was certain he would only extinguish. The North Conservatory was a world away from the cold stone of the citadel. It was a bubble of life and light, a vast glass house filled with exotic plants and the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers. Sunlight, pale though it was, streamed through the panes, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Elodie had arrived before dawn, setting up her easel and canvas, arranging her paints and brushes on a small wooden cart. She chose a spot where the light would fall across the subject from the side, creating the shadows and depth she needed. When he arrived, the king seemed to fill the space, his dark form a stark contrast to the vibrant green of the foliage. He moved with a predator's grace that belied his size, the silver mask catching the morning light. "Here?" he asked, his voice still a low rumble. "Yes, Your Majesty." "The light is perfect," she said, her voice soft but sure. "If you would sit in this chair." She indicated a heavy, carved wooden chair she had positioned earlier. He did so without a word, his posture rigid, his hands resting on his knees. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Elodie took a deep breath, picking up a piece of charcoal. This was her domain. Here she was not just an omega, she was an artist. She began to sketch the basic outline of his form onto the canvas, her eyes flitting back and forth between him and her work. She didn't look at the mask, not yet. She focused on the powerful set of his shoulders, the line of his jaw on the unmasked side, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. She tried to ignore the sheer force of his presence, the way her wolf seemed to be purring, a low, contented hum deep in her chest. For an hour, the only sounds were the scratch of her charcoal on the canvas and the distant call of a raven. Leander sat as still as stone, a king carved from granite. But Elodie could see the tension. It was in the tight set of his visible jaw, the way his fingers were clenched into fists. He was enduring this, not participating. "Your Majesty," she began softly, not looking up from her canvas. "When I painted Elder Maeve, she told me stories. About the great frost of her youth, about the first time she saw her mate. It helped me see her, not just her face." He said nothing. The silence grew heavier. Elodie risked a glance at him. His single eye was fixed on her, sharp and intense. "I do not tell stories," he said, his voice flat. "Then perhaps you could tell me about your crown," she tried again, her voice gentle. "The craftsmanship is extraordinary. Is it old?" He seemed to consider this. After a long moment, he spoke. "It was my grandfather's. The silver is from the Shadowfang mines. Each point represents one of the 7 original packs that formed the Northern Alliance." His voice was grudging, but it was a start. She pressed gently forward. "Your grandfather must have been a great man, a visionary." Leander's jaw tightened slightly. He was. He dreamed of unity when the packs were still fractured by old grudges. "Did you grow up hearing those stories? About the packs and their histories?" Elodie kept her voice casual, her hands moving steadily across the canvas. "Or were you tutored differently?" The question was so ordinary, so genuine, that he found himself answering. My father preferred that I learn through experience rather than tales. He believed softness came from books. There was an edge to the words, a hint of long-standing pain. Elodie absorbed this, nodding slowly. I learned differently. My mother was a weaver, and she filled our home with stories while her hands worked the looms. Colors, patterns, the history woven into each piece. That's where I learned to see, through her stories. She paused, letting him absorb her offering of vulnerability. Is that where your passion for art began? Leander asked, his tone fractionally softer. Perhaps. She died when I was 12. After that, I needed to express what I couldn't say aloud. The paintbrush became my voice. It was a profound admission, and she didn't look at him as she made it. The silence that followed was different, not heavy with tension, but with understanding. Your father, Elodie ventured carefully, would he have approved of your art? His visible eye darkened. He died before I became an artist, but I know what he would have said. That beauty is a luxury the strong cannot afford. She finally looked at him then, her brush pausing. Do you believe that? The question hung between them, raw and unfiltered. For the first time since she'd arrived, Leander seemed to truly consider her, not as a commission or a professional obligation, but as another person grappling with the weight of legacy. I did, he said quietly. I am no longer certain. It was my grandfather's. The silver is from the Shadowfang mines. Each point represents one of the 7 original packs that formed the Northern Alliance. His voice was grudging, but it was a start. Elodie kept her questions simple, impersonal. She asked about the tapestries in the hall, the history of the citadel, the breed of the hounds in the kennels. And slowly, grudgingly, he answered. Each word was a stone pulled from a well, but he gave them to her. She learned that he preferred the crisp air of the mountains to the stifling humidity of the southern territories, that he had read every book in his study, that he found the intricate politics of the court a tedious necessity. She sketched and then began to lay down the base layers of paint, her hands moving with practiced confidence. She was capturing the king, the ruler, the broad shoulders, the regal posture, the weight of the crown. But the man was still hidden. After another hour, he shifted, a subtle movement, but she caught it. We can take a break, Your Majesty, she offered. I am fine, he clipped out. Your leg, she said simply. You're favoring it. His eye narrowed. He had been wounded in the same attack that had scarred his face, a rogue's claw tearing through the muscle of his thigh. The wound ached in the cold, a constant nagging reminder. No one ever dared to mention it. His guards pretended not to see his occasional limp. His council pretended he was invincible. But this small Omega artist, her focus so intense, had noticed. He found he wasn't angry. He was surprised. It is nothing, he said, but the denial was weaker this time. Even stone wears down, she murmured, her focus back on her canvas. The comment hung in the air between them. It was a simple observation, but it felt like something more. It felt like understanding. As the session ended and he stood to leave, he paused at the door. The hounds are ridgebacks, he said, his back to her. My father bred them for tracking in high altitudes. Then he was gone, leaving Elodie alone with his portrait. She looked at the canvas. She had captured the king, yes, the power, the authority. But as she looked at the smooth blank space where she would have to paint the silver mask, a profound dissatisfaction settled over her. She had his words, small pieces of his life, but she did not have his story. Not the one that mattered. And her wolf, soothed by his presence, now felt a pang of his absence, a quiet ache that was entirely new. The sittings fell into a routine. Every morning, just as the sun crested the eastern peaks, Leander would enter the conservatory, and Elodie would be there waiting. The silence between them was no longer as heavy. It had become a shared space, punctuated by Elodie's quiet questions and Leander's clipped, yet increasingly frequent replies. He learned that her favorite color was the deep, rich blue of twilight. She learned that he had a deep appreciation for classical music, a secret he shared with no one. He found himself watching her as much as she watched him. He watched the way she bit her lip in concentration, the smudge of ultramarine on her cheek, the focused intensity in her warm brown eyes. Her scent was a constant, gentle presence that soothed the ragged edges of his soul. His wolf, which had been a creature of rage and bitterness for a decade, was calmer now, watchful. It recognized her not just as mate, but as something more. A safe harbor. He started to look forward to the mornings, to the quiet hours spent in her presence. It was a dangerous feeling. One morning, Beta Aldrich entered the conservatory midway through their session, his presence an immediate intrusion. His sharp, ozonic scent clashed with the soft fragrance of Elodie and the earthy smell of the plants. "Your Majesty," Aldrich said, bowing stiffly, though his eyes were fixed on Elodie with open suspicion. "The emissaries from the Sunstone Pack have arrived. They are demanding an immediate audience regarding the border dispute." Leander's visible eye hardened, the brief peace of the morning shattered. The king was back, the ruler burdened by duty. "They were not expected until tomorrow," he growled. "They claim the matter is urgent, Alpha," Aldrich pressed, then lowered his voice, though Elodie could still hear. "Lyra is with them. She is insistent." Lyra, the Alpha daughter of the Sunstone Pack's leader. A beautiful, ambitious she-wolf who had made it clear she wished to be his Luna, to unite their powerful packs. The thought of her cloying perfume and sharp-edged ambition, made his stomach turn. His gaze flickered to Elodie, who was quietly cleaning her brushes, pretending not to listen. But he could see the subtle tension in her shoulders. "Tell them I will meet them in 1 hour," Leander commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Aldrich hesitated. "Your Majesty, perhaps it would be best to dismiss the artist for the day. These are sensitive negotiations." The unspoken message was clear. This Omega doesn't belong here. A low growl rumbled in Leander's chest before he could stop it. The sound was quiet, but it vibrated through the conservatory, making the glass tremble. Aldrich froze, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized the sound of pure, possessive warning. It was the sound an alpha makes when someone gets too close to his mate. Leander was as shocked as his beta. He had not lost control of his wolf like that in years. He saw Elodie's hand still, her knuckles white where she gripped a rag. He had frightened her. The thought was like a knife to the gut. He reined in his wolf, forcing a mask of cold authority back into place. "Miss Voss is here at my command, Aldrich. Her work is not finished. See to the emissaries." His tone was ice. Beta Aldrich bowed low, his expression unreadable. "Yes, Alpha." He shot one last, distrustful look at Elodie before exiting the conservatory, his stiff posture radiating disapproval. The silence he left behind was thick with what had just happened. Leander's heart was pounding. He had almost exposed himself, his feelings, his wolf's desperate claim. He looked at Elodie. She had set down her brushes and was now looking at her hands, avoiding his gaze. "I apologize," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "My beta is overzealous." Elodie finally looked up, her expression not one of fear, but of a quiet, searching curiosity. "He is loyal to you, Your Majesty. It is an admirable trait." She didn't question the growl. She didn't recoil. She simply stated a fact, offering him a path away from the raw emotion of the moment. Her grace was astonishing. It disarmed him completely. He found himself wanting to explain, to tell her that Aldrich was wrong, that her presence was the only thing that made these cold stone walls bearable. But he couldn't. The risk was too great. "We are finished for today," he said abruptly, standing. He needed to get away from her, from the feelings she stirred in him, before he made a mistake he couldn't take back. He strode from the room without another word, leaving Elodie standing by her easel, the scent of his turmoil, a sharp spike of ozone in his usual winter storm fragrance, lingering in the air. She touched her chest, right over her heart, where a strange ache had blossomed. It wasn't fear. It was something else entirely, something that felt dangerously like longing. The incident with Beta Aldrich shifted something between them. Leander became more guarded in the following days, his answers shorter, the silence between them heavier. He was fighting a war within himself, and Elodie could feel it. His wolf, the one that had growled to protect her, was now being held in a brutal check. She could sense his struggle in the air, a tension that was almost visible. She poured her own frustration and burgeoning feelings into the portrait. She worked on the details of his tunic, the intricate carving on the throne, the weight and texture of the velvet. She captured the king in all his magnificent, lonely glory. But the canvas felt incomplete, dishonest. The mask stared back at her, a silver lie. She found herself sketching him in the margins of her canvas, quick, stolen sketches of his profile, the curve of his unmasked side, trying to solve the riddle of what lay beneath. Each sketch was an act of longing, a desperate wish to see the whole of him. One afternoon, as she was reaching for a tube of paint on the high shelf of her cart, she misjudged the distance. The cart wobbled, and several tubes, along with a jar of turpentine, tumbled towards the floor. Before she could even gasp, a dark shape moved with impossible speed. Leander was there, his large body shielding her as the jar shattered on the stone floor, splashing the caustic liquid where she had been standing moments before. He had one arm wrapped firmly around her waist, holding her against his chest. The world seemed to stop. Elodie's cheek was pressed against the hard muscle of his chest. She could hear the frantic, heavy beat of his heart, a wild drum against her ear. His scent enveloped her, pine and storm and something else, something uniquely him, a scent that made her feel inexplicably safe. Her own wolf sighed, a soft, happy sound of homecoming. Leander was frozen. He was holding his mate. Her soft curves were pressed against him, her scent was in his lungs, and it was taking every ounce of his legendary control not to bury his face in her hair, not to let his wolf claim what was his. Her body was so small, so fragile in his arms. The fierce, protective instinct that had ripped a growl from him days ago surged again, a tidal wave of emotion. He had to protect her, always. He could feel her breath, warm against his tunic. He could feel the slight tremor running through her body. He had to let her go. He forced his arms to loosen their grip, stepping back as if burned. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Elodie steadied herself, her heart still racing. The feeling of being held by him lingered, a phantom warmth on her skin. "Yes, thank you, Your Majesty." Her voice was barely a whisper. Their eyes met, and for a heart-stopping moment, the masks were gone. Not his silver one, but the emotional ones they both wore. In his single, whiskey-colored eye, she saw a maelstrom of longing, fear, and a desperate tenderness that stole her breath. And in her eyes, he saw not fear of him, but a dawning wonder, a soft, unguarded vulnerability that mirrored his own. The moment stretched, fragile and potent. It was he who broke it, his jaw tightening. He turned away, his broad back a wall once more. "Be more careful," he said, the command harsh, but the undertone was one of raw concern. He knelt, carefully picking up the large shards of glass, his powerful hands surprisingly gentle. Elodie watched him, her heart aching. The king, who commanded armies and ruled over 7 packs, was kneeling at her feet, cleaning up her mess to ensure she wouldn't be harmed. He was a good man. A man trapped in a prison of his own making. When he finally left the conservatory that evening, Leander did not return to his study or his chambers. Instead, he wandered the citadel like a ghost, unable to settle, unable to think. His wolf was roaring inside him, a constant, maddening howl that demanded he go back to her, claim her, protect her, make her understand what she meant to him. He found himself in the training grounds, where the evening air was cold and sharp. He worked the heavy bag with brutal intensity, his fists connecting again and again, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The physical punishment did nothing to quiet the want that burned through his veins like wildfire. He could still feel her against him, the softness of her curves, the delicate weight of her in his arms. He could still smell her scent, clinging to his clothes like a ghost, and it was the most exquisite torture. His wolf had recognized her instantly as mate, as the missing piece of his soul. But the man, Leander, was convinced that bringing her into his darkness would only destroy her. What could he offer her but a scarred, broken shell of an alpha? His hands, when he finally stopped and held them before his face, were bleeding. The cuts in his knuckles had opened from the violence of his assault on the bag. He stared at them dispassionately. Physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in his chest. He remembered the way she had looked at him, not with fear, not with pity, but with a kind of desperate curiosity, as if she was trying to solve the riddle of him. And he remembered her words, "Even stone wears down." The observation had struck something within him, a truth he had been running from for a decade. He couldn't maintain this wall forever. The cracks were already showing. She was already inside, already lodged in his heart like a splinter he couldn't remove. That evening, alone in his chambers, Leander took off his mask and looked at himself in the mirror for the first time in weeks. The scarred face that stared back was still a ruin, still the visage of his shame. But for the first time he wondered, what if he was wrong? What if, in her eyes, it could be something other than a monster's face? The thought terrified him more than any physical threat ever could. It wasn't just a matter of artistic integrity anymore. It was a matter of the heart. She could not paint a lie on the face of a man she was beginning to care for so deeply. That evening, she did not work on the portrait. Instead, she sat in her small room in the citadel, the scent of him still clinging to her clothes, and sketched his face from memory. Over and over, she drew the strong line of his jaw, the shape of his eye, his dark hair. Her fingers ached with the need to capture him, to understand him through the medium of art the way she couldn't through words. She drew his single visible eye, that sharp whiskey-colored gaze that saw everything and revealed nothing. She drew the firm set of his mouth, the dark shadow of stubble along his unmasked cheek. And then, trembling, she tried to imagine what lay beneath the silver. She closed her eyes, trying to feel it rather than see it. She remembered the way he had held her, the power in his arms, the careful restraint of a man terrified of his own strength. She imagined scars, deep ones, the kind that marked a person's soul as much as their flesh. But in her imagination, they were not hideous. They were proof. Proof that he had survived the unsurvivable. Proof that he was stronger than anything that had tried to destroy him. She sketched the left side of his face as she imagined it might be. Lines and shadows, the architecture of trauma reshaping bone and skin into something new. Her wolf stirred within her, restless and yearning. She felt the pull toward him, the primal recognition that here was her other half, her mate. The word terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. How could she paint him as he was meant to be seen if he refused to show himself? How could she honor the truth he kept hidden? Her wolf paced inside her mind, crying out to return to the conservatory, to be near him, to tell him without words what her heart already knew. But Elodie held her back. She had to be careful. He had to choose to trust her, and until he did, she would wait, sketching him in the margins of her life, trying to solve the riddle of the man beneath the mask. She filled page after page of her sketchbook, her frustration mounting with each attempt. Because every sketch, no matter how skillfully rendered, felt like a lie. She could paint his features, but not his story. She could paint his beauty, but not his truth. And there was no way to complete the official portrait without the truth. As the night wore on, the realization crystallized within her. She had to choose between her duty to the court and her integrity as an artist. Between the comfortable lie and the painful truth. And she knew what she had to do. She could not paint the mask. She would not paint the lie. The next few sittings were strained. The memory of his arms around her, the raw emotion in his eye, hung between them, an unspoken truth. Elodie found she couldn't bring herself to paint the mask. She worked on the background, the deep shadows of the throne, the glint of light on his crown, anything to avoid the smooth silver void on the canvas. Leander felt her withdrawal. He felt the shift in her, and it terrified him. He thought he had scared her off for good. The brief moment of connection had been a mistake. He retreated further into his cold, kingly shell, the silence in the conservatory becoming a chasm between them. His wolf paced the confines of his mind, whining in distress. "Go to her," it urged. "Show her. She will not run." But the man, Leander, was a coward, ruled by a decade of shame. He couldn't. He wouldn't. The portrait was nearing completion, and still the face was half blank. Lord Valerius and Beta Aldrich had both commented on the slow progress, their suspicious gazes making Elodie's skin crawl. The pressure was mounting. She was running out of time. One evening, long after the sun had set, Elodie was still in the conservatory, unable to leave. She stood before the canvas, her heart heavy. It was a masterful painting of a king, technically perfect, and it was a complete failure. She heard the door open and turned, expecting a guard telling her to retire. But it was Leander. He was without his crown, his dark hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired, the lines of strain visible around his eye and mouth. "You are working late," he observed, his voice quiet in the vast, dark space. "I cannot finish it," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. She gestured to the portrait. "This is not you. This is a crown and a mask. It's not the truth." Leander walked slowly towards the canvas, his gaze fixed on the painting. He stood beside her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He looked at the powerful figure on the canvas, at the blank space where his scars should be. "It is the only truth I have allowed the world for 10 years, he said, his voice hollow. "Why should you be any different?" "Because I'm not painting for the world," she whispered, turning to face him. "I'm painting for you, and I want to get it right." His visible eyes searched her face in the dim moonlight filtering through the glass ceiling. He saw no judgment, no guile, only a deep, painful sincerity that echoed the ache in his own chest. He had been holding this back for so long, the weight of it was crushing him. Her quiet presence over the past weeks had worn down his defenses, chipping away at the stone wall around his heart until only the final, terrifying barrier remained. The mask. His wolf was screaming at him, a desperate, howling plea. "Trust her. She is our mate. She is our salvation." His hand, trembling slightly, rose to the back of his head. His fingers found the small, intricate clasps hidden in his hair. He hesitated, his entire being locked in a battle between a decade of fear and a fragile new shoot of hope. What if she screamed? What if she looked at him with disgust, with the same horror he saw in his own reflection every morning? The revulsion would kill him. But what if she didn't? The question was a spark in the overwhelming darkness. The thought of her, of his mate, seeing the real him and not running. It was a hope so powerful it was painful. He took a shaky breath. The scent of her, meadowsweet and summer rain, filled his senses, a calming balm on his frayed nerves. He looked into her wide, trusting eyes. And he made a choice. The clasps came undone with a soft click that sounded like a thunderclap in the silent conservatory. He lowered his hand, the silver mask held loosely in his fingers. For a moment, he kept his head bowed, giving her a chance to turn away, to run. He braced himself for the gasp, for the sound of retreating footsteps. There was only silence. Slowly, Leander lifted his head, forcing himself to meet her gaze, to witness the revulsion he was so sure would be there. The left side of his face was a ruin. A tapestry of scars, thick and jagged, pulled the skin taut, twisting his features into a permanent, grim parody of what they had once been. One scar sliced down from his temple, narrowly missing his eye, but leaving the eyelid slightly drooped. Another, deeper and wider, carved a canyon from his cheekbone to his jaw, puckering the skin around it. The flesh was mottled, a patchwork of pale, silvery lines and angry, reddish tissue. It was, he knew, the face of a monster. He watched her, his breath held in his chest, his heart a painful, stuttering drum. Elodie didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Her warm brown eyes, luminous in the moonlight, didn't fixate on the scars with horror. Instead, they moved over his face with the same intense, focused concentration she used when she was studying a subject for a portrait. She was simply seeing him. The silence stretched, and with every second that passed without a scream, a piece of the ice that had encased his heart for 10 years cracked. Then she took a small step forward. And another. until she was standing directly in front of him, so close he could see the flecks of gold in her irises. Her hand lifted, and his entire body tensed, preparing for a blow of rejection. But her touch, when it came, was impossibly gentle. Her fingertips, cool and soft, traced the jagged line of the scar from his temple. She followed its path down his cheek, her touch as light as a whisper, a feather-soft caress that sent a tremor through his entire body. No one had touched his scars, ever. Not even his healers had done so without a clinical detachment that felt like disgust. He had recoiled from his own reflection. He had hidden this part of himself away like a shameful secret. But her touch, it wasn't clinical. It wasn't pitying. It was reverent. She explored the landscape of his face, her fingers tracing each mark, each ridge of damaged tissue, each painful line. He squeezed his eyes shut, a strangled sound catching in his throat. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through the dust on his unscarred cheek. "Beautiful," she murmured, her voice so soft it was almost part of the silence. He thought he must have misheard. His eyes snapped open, searching her face for any sign of mockery, of deceit. There was none. There was only a profound, heartbreaking sincerity. "These tell your story," she whispered, her fingers now resting gently on the deepest scar along his jawline. "They tell of survival, of strength. This is not the face of a monster, Your Majesty. This is the face of a king who fought for his life and won." That was it. That was the moment the dam broke. A decade of pain, of loneliness, of self-hatred and despair came crashing down. A raw sob was torn from his chest, a sound of such utter brokenness it seemed to shake the very foundations of the citadel. He doubled over, his body racked with tremors, the silver mask falling from his nerveless fingers and clattering to the stone floor. He was breaking, shattering into a million pieces right in front of her. Elodie didn't hesitate. She stepped into his space, wrapping her arms around his shuddering frame, holding him as he wept. She was small against his massive form, but her embrace was solid, unwavering. She held the alpha king of the northern packs as he cried for the first time in 10 years, her hand stroking the back of his head, her cheek pressed against his unscarred side. "It's all right," she murmured over and over, her voice a soothing balm. "I see you. It's all right." He clung to her, burying his face, his real, ruined face, in the soft curve of her neck, inhaling her scent of meadowsweet and summer rain. It was the scent of acceptance, the scent of home. His wolf, his proud, wounded wolf, was silent for once, not with rage, but with a profound, soul-deep peace. It was curled up at the heart of him, finally safe. He had shown his mate the very worst of himself, the part he was convinced made him unlovable, and she had not only accepted it, she had called it beautiful. He didn't know how long they stood there, him weeping in her arms, her quietly holding him together. But when his sobs finally subsided into ragged breaths, he didn't pull away. He simply held on, resting his weight against her, letting her be his strength. He lifted his head, his scarred cheek brushing against hers. He looked down at her, his vision blurry with tears. "Paint me," he whispered, his voice raw. "Paint me like this. Paint the truth." Elodie looked up at him, her own eyes shining with unshed tears. She reached up and gently wiped away the tear track on his cheek with her thumb. "I will," she promised. "I will paint the man I see." In the days that followed, everything was different. Leander no longer wore the mask to their sittings. The first morning he walked into the conservatory, his face bare in the bright light of day, he was tense, expecting the change to be a shock. But Elodie simply smiled at him, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and gestured to the chair. "Good morning, Leander," she said, using his name for the first time. The sound of it on her lips, spoken so naturally, was a gift. The tension bled out of him, replaced by a warmth that spread through his chest. The sittings became less of a formal duty and more of a shared ritual. He talked, really talked. He told her about the rogue attack, Not the gory details, but the fear, the feeling of his life slipping away, and the profound, crushing shame he felt when he first saw his reflection afterward. He spoke of his father, a hard man who had valued strength above all else, and how he had felt he had failed that legacy by being so grievously wounded. Elodie listened, her hands moving across the canvas, her gaze full of empathy. She, in turn, told him of her quiet life, of her dreams of opening a small school to teach Omega children art, a passion often denied to their station. He saw the strength in her, the quiet resilience that had allowed her to build a life for herself on her own terms. She was not just a gentle soul. She was a force of nature in her own right. She painted with a feverish intensity, her focus absolute. She was no longer just an artist rendering a subject. She was a woman capturing the soul of the man she was falling in love with. The blank space on the canvas came to life. With tender, masterful strokes, she rendered his scars, not as marks of horror, but as part of the landscape of his face. She found the beauty in them that she had spoken of, the way they mapped his survival. She captured the weariness in his eye, but also the flicker of hope that she had ignited there. She was painting not just his face, but his story, his pain, and his emerging strength. Their intimacy grew with every shared story, every quiet moment. One afternoon, he found her staring at the finished portrait, a conflicted look on her face. "What is it?" he asked softly. "It is the best work I have ever done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And I am afraid of what will happen when they see it." He came to stand beside her, his arm brushing hers. He looked at the painting. He saw himself. Truly saw himself, for the first time, through her eyes. He saw the king, yes, but he also saw the man. He saw the scars, and for the first time they did not scream of monstrosity. They spoke of resilience. "My wolf recognized you from the first moment," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It was a confession, a declaration. He knew you were my mate." Elodie's breath hitched. She turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "My wolf," she admitted. "She feels it too. She feels home when you are near." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. The gesture was tentative, questioning. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. He was so close now, his scent a heady mix of pine and winter storm that made her dizzy. "Elodie." He breathed her name like a prayer. He lowered his head, his forehead coming to rest against hers. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, more intimate than any kiss. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, their hearts beating in a matched rhythm. "I will not let anyone harm you," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "When they see this portrait, they will see you standing with me. Let them whisper, let them scheme. It will not matter. You are mine." The word mine settled deep in her soul, not as a claim of ownership, but as a promise of belonging. It was protection. It was devotion. It was everything she had never known she wanted. He pulled back slightly, his whiskey-colored eye searching her face. "The unveiling is in 2 days. At the grand coronation ball. I want you by my side." "I will be," she promised, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion running through her. He was asking her to face the entire political hornet's nest of the Northern Pax with him. He was asking her to be his partner, not just his artist. And there was no other answer she could possibly give. The night of the coronation ball, the great hall of the citadel was transformed. Gone was the usual cold austerity, replaced by a riot of color, light, and sound. Thousands of candles glittered in massive chandeliers, casting a warm glow on the powerful alphas, elegant betas, and watchful courtiers who filled the space. The air was thick with expensive perfumes and the complex scents of hundreds of wolves, a tapestry of power, ambition, and intrigue. Elodie stood in a small antechamber off the main hall, her hands cold with nerves. She wore a simple gown of deep twilight blue, a color he had once told her he loved. She felt like a small, plain bird in a flock of peacocks. She could hear the murmur of the crowd, the swell of the orchestra, and she was terrified. The door opened and Leander entered, He was dressed in his full coronation regalia, a severe black tunic embroidered with silver thread, the heavy Alpha King's cloak draped over his shoulders. And his face was bare. A collective gasp had rippled through the hall when he had entered, followed by a wave of shocked, frantic whispers. He had not hidden. He had walked among them, his scars displayed for all to see, his head held high. His single eye found her, and the stern mask of the king softened. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. He offered her his arm. "Are you ready?" She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling as she placed her hand on his forearm. The muscle beneath the fabric was solid, a rock of certainty. "No," she admitted honestly. "But I will be, with you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My wolf will never let you go," he promised, a quiet vow. "Stay by my side." Together they walked into the great hall. A hush fell over the crowd as they entered, a silence so profound it was deafening. Every eye was on them. On the unmasked king and the unknown Omega at his side. The whispers started again, louder this time. Elodie could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment, the malice. She kept her eyes fixed forward, her hand gripping his arm. Then, a clear, cutting voice sliced through the murmurs. "Well, well, the king has found himself a new pet." Lyra, the alpha from the Sunstone pack, stepped forward. She was stunningly beautiful in a gown of fiery red, her scent sharp and aggressive. Her eyes, however, were cold and cruel as she looked Elodie up and down with disdain. "An Omega artist. How quaint. Did you paint him a pretty new face to make him feel better?" The insult was a physical blow. Elodie flinched, her cheeks flushing with shame. Before Leander could even react, Beta Aldrich was at Lyra's side, his hand on her arm. "That is enough, Lady Lyra." But Lyra shook him off, her gaze fixed on Leander, a challenge in her eyes. "Why would you shame yourself with this commoner? Your scars are a mark of weakness. You should be hiding them, not parading them around with this nothing by your side. Our packs were meant to unite. I would have made you strong again." A low, dangerous growl started in Leander's chest. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop. His alpha presence washed over the crowd, a wave of pure, undiluted power that demanded submission. Wolves throughout the hall lowered their eyes, some even baring their throats instinctively. "You dare?" Leander's voice was deadly calm, more terrifying than any shout. "You dare speak to her that way? You speak of strength, Lyra, but you know nothing of it. Strength is not hiding your wounds, it is owning them." He turned from Lyra, his attention now on the entire assembly. He raised his voice, and it rang with the authority of a king. "For 10 years I have lived in shadow. I let shame and fear rule me. I thought my scars made me a monster." He then turned and looked down at Elodie, his expression softening into one of utter devotion. He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers and raising it for all to see. "This woman, this Omega you see as a nothing, saw past the scars. She saw the man. She did not see weakness. She saw a story. She did not see a monster. She saw a king." He turned his gaze back to the stunned crowd. The portrait, which had been veiled on a large easel at the front of the hall, was now his focus. "Tonight was meant for my coronation, but plans have changed." With a flick of his wrist, he sent a silent command to the guards by the easel. They pulled the velvet rope, and the veil fell away. The portrait was revealed. A collective gasp swept the room. It was him, unmasked. The scars were there, rendered with such honesty and artistry that they were not hideous, but compelling. The portrait was one of undeniable power, but also of deep humanity, of vulnerability and resilience. It was the truth. "This," Leander declared, his voice ringing with pride, "is how I will be seen from now on. This is my truth. And she is the one who gave it back to me." He then lifted her hand to his lips, placing a kiss against her knuckles, a gesture of honor and devotion. The crowd held its breath. Then a roar of approval erupted, hesitant at first but growing in power and passion as his court recognized this moment for what it was: transformation. Lyra's face turned a mottled red with rage, and she stormed from the hall, her followers scrambling after her in humiliation. Leander pulled Elodie close, his arm around her waist, presenting her to the assembled nobility with unmistakable pride. "This is my Luna," he announced to the entire court. "And I stand with her, scarred and whole, before all of you. Let there be no doubt in any mind. She is not an Omega who should be overlooked. She is the artist who saw the king I had forgotten I could be. She is mine, and I am hers, now and forever." The morning after the coronation ball, Elodie found herself unable to sleep. She had returned to her small room exhausted, but electrified, her mind replaying every moment, the gasp of the crowd, the warmth of his hand, the fierce protection in his voice when he declared her his Luna before all of them. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, she found herself drawn back to the conservatory. It was empty at this hour, filled only with the pale early light and the scent of the flowers and plants that had become her sanctuary within the citadel's cold walls. She was standing before the finished portrait, studying the man she had rendered, no longer the masked king, but a being of raw honesty and hard-won strength, when she heard his footsteps. Leander had been unable to sleep as well, his wolf restless and triumphant after the knight's declaration. He found her there, silhouetted against the morning light, and for a moment he simply watched her. She was so small, so impossibly fragile, and yet she had shown more courage than most of his warriors ever would. She had seen his greatest shame and called it beautiful. She had chosen him, fully aware of what that choice meant. When she sensed his presence and turned, he saw the question in her eyes. Everything had changed in a single night, but there were still uncertainties between them, still fears. "I could not sleep," she admitted softly. "Nor could I," he replied. He walked to her slowly, drawn by the pull of the bond forming between them. When he reached her, he didn't touch her, not yet. Instead, he looked at the portrait alongside her, at the man she had painted. "Do you see yourself truly in this?" she asked quietly. "I see the man I might become," he said, "because you saw him first." He turned to face her then, his scarred cheek exposed to the light without shame, without the old bitterness. "In 3 days, we will be bonded before the elders. There is still time if you wish to reconsider. This path will not be easy. There will be those who oppose our union, who believe an Omega should not stand as Luna. There will be politics, intrigue, danger." He was giving her an out, she realized. Even now, he was trying to protect her by offering her an escape. Elodie reached up and placed her palm against his scarred cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her hand, feeling him lean into her touch like a wolf seeking comfort. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life," she whispered. "My art led me here, to you. The goddess does not make mistakes." His eye closed briefly as he absorbed her words, this declaration of absolute faith in them, in their bond. When he opened it again, she saw the last shadows of doubt begin to fade from that whiskey-colored gaze. "I love you," he said, the words raw and new and terrifying in their honesty. "I do not know if I know how to love properly. I have been alone for so long, but everything in me that is wolf, that is soul, recognizes you as home." Elodie's eyes filled with tears. "And I love you, Leander Ashworth." The scarred man, the lonely king, the soul that learned to hope again. "I love all of you." In that quiet moment, with the morning light painting their figures in gold, they held each other. It was a simple embrace, but it was everything. A promise, a beginning, a healing. The days following the coronation ball were a whirlwind. The story of the unmasked king and his Omega mate spread like wildfire through the northern Pax. The portrait was hung in the main gallery of the citadel, a constant public testament to the change that had swept through their king. There were still whispers, of course. Some of the more traditionalist alphas and the ambitious courtiers who had backed Lyra muttered about the impropriety of an Omega Luna. But Leander, with Elodie by his side, was a different man. He was no longer just a ruler. He was a leader. The vulnerability he had shown had not made him weaker in the eyes of his people. It had made him real. He met with his council, Elodie quietly present, and his commands were still absolute, but now they were tempered with a new wisdom, an empathy he had long suppressed. He settled the dispute with the Sunstone Pack not with threats, but with a firm, fair negotiation that left them with their dignity, but no question as to who was in charge. Lyra was sent home in disgrace, her ambition having led to her public downfall. Beta Aldrich, after witnessing the events of the ball, approached Elodie one evening. He bowed low, his expression one of deep, sincere remorse. "Luna," he said, the title rolling off his tongue with newfound respect. "I was wrong. I was blinded by what I thought was loyalty. I saw only your station, not your character. Your strength is quieter than an alpha's roar, but it is just as powerful. You have saved him, and in doing so, you have saved us all. Forgive me." Elodie placed a hand on his arm. "There is nothing to forgive, Aldrich. You love him. You were protecting your king." In that moment, she did not just gain a Beta's loyalty. She gained a friend. The true bonding ceremony was held a week later, under the light of a full moon, in the ancient sacred circle high in the mountains above the citadel. It was a private affair, attended only by Aldrich, Lord Valerius, and a few of the pack elders who had pledged their immediate support. Dressed in simple white, Elodie stood across from Leander. He too was dressed simply, his face bare to the cool moonlight. The scars on his face seemed to glow, etched in silver by the moon's glow. "The bond between us cannot be denied," he said, his voice resonating with love and power. "My wolf recognized you, and my heart followed. I choose you, Elodie Voss, before the moon and the mountains, now and for all my days." "And I choose you, Leander Ashworth," she replied, her voice clear and strong. "You are my mate, my other half. My wolf knew your soul before I ever saw your face. I will stand with you, always." They sealed their vows not with a formal kiss, but by transforming. The pain of the shift was a distant thing, overshadowed by the sheer joy of the moment. Bones cracked and reformed, skin gave way to fur. Leander's wolf was immense, a magnificent creature of midnight black fur, his whiskey-colored eyes glowing with intelligence. The scars were still visible, faint lines in the fur on his great wolf's muzzle. Elodie's wolf was smaller, sleeker, her fur the color of rich cream, her eyes the same warm brown as her human form. She was not a warrior wolf, but she was swift and sure-footed, her spirit bright. He approached her slowly, and she did not cower. She met him with a soft nudge of her muzzle against his. It was a greeting, an acceptance. He let out a low, rumbling purr of pure contentment, a sound she felt vibrate through her entire being. Then, he turned and nudged her gently, an invitation. "Run with me under the moon." Together, they ran. They raced through the ancient pine forests, their paws silent on the mossy ground. They were a blur of black and cream, a perfect union of strength and grace. They ran, not as king and consort, not as Alpha and Omega, but as two halves of a single soul, finally made whole. They climbed to the highest peak, the one overlooking the entire kingdom, and they sat side by side, their fur brushing. The night was vast and magnificent, the stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. The moon bathed them in silver light, and in that moment, Elodie's wolf felt the sacred bond seal between them. It was not a physical claiming, but something far more profound, a melding of souls. The final confirmation by the moon goddess herself that they were meant to be. Leander's wolf let out a single, pure howl of celebration, a sound of joy and triumph that rang across the mountains and valleys. His mate's voice joined his a moment later, her cry intertwining with his until they sounded like a single, perfect song. A song of healing, a song of acceptance, a song of love that had transformed them both. As they sat together under the moonlight, Elodie's wolf rested her head against her mate's chest, listening to his heartbeat. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be truly, irrevocably bonded to another soul. He would never wear the mask again. He didn't need it anymore. He had his Luna, and in her eyes, he was already whole.